Hey guys, tonight we trudge back to the year 1066, a year when Harold got an arrow in the eye. William got a crown and chickens? Well, chickens got very organized. You're standing ankle deep in muddy fields somewhere in the south of England. It's foggy damp, and the air smells like a mix of sheep hearth smoke and the pungent reminder that nobody's invented deodorant yet. You're not a knight, not even a squire. No, tonight you're a peasant, and your job is to keep track of Lord William's chickens. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who else is dozing off to medieval livestock management. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the cackling of hens. Not yours, of course, nothing is yours. Everything you touch belongs to the Normans now, and they're very specific about how things are handled. Since conquering England, the Normans haven't just been busy building castles and inventing French-sounding surnames. They've also been reshaping how property, including animals, is counted, taxed, and controlled. Yes, even chickens. Before the Normans, Anglo-Saxon villages were more laissez-faire about poultry. Birds roamed semi-freely. A chicken was a chicken unless it was dinner, and tracking them was done with rough estimates and shrugged shoulders. But the Normans... oh no. The Normans brought bureaucracy. The first thing they did, they restructured how estates were managed. And that meant building proper coops, actual infrastructure for chickens. These weren't your slapdash wooden pens either. Norman coops had hinged doors, thatched roofs, and even perimeter fencing. One scribe described them as foul fortresses, which sounds like a medieval superhero headquarters, but in truth meant the chickens stopped wandering into the pigsty and causing political unrest among livestock. Your day begins by checking each coop. You open the gate, you count. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Was that hen already counted? You sigh and start over. Precision matters. You don't want the steward accusing you of foul play. Chickens were not just food. They were assets, and mismanaging them could be as serious as misplacing a silver goblet. And counting wasn't done willy-nilly. Oh no. You used tally sticks. These were pieces of wood with notches carved into them, 1 notch per bird. Once tallied, the stick was split in 2. Half for you, half for the steward. That way, if you said you had 20 hens and he showed up with a stick that only had 17 notches, boom, you were on trial for poultry fraud. Historians still argue whether tally sticks were the most efficient method, but no one disputes that they were a medieval favorite for all kinds of record keeping. There was even a ritual element to it. Before the official tally, a prayer was sometimes mumbled. Something about blessing the Lord's bounty, which translated loosely to, "Don't let the foxes take any this week." And if you were especially unlucky, the manor priest might accompany you to supervise muttering psalms and occasionally blessing a particularly plump rooster, which frankly feels unnecessary. Now chickens weren't just chickens. You had layers, you had meat birds, and you had specials, the ones with glossy feathers that the lady of the manor kept around to impress guests like medieval mood lighting. These got named. These got better feed. These got buried when they died, unlike your lunch, which just got roasted and forgotten. Norman lords were obsessed with order. And chickens were one of the few renewable resources that didn't involve chopping down another forest or invading your neighbor. Each estate's poultry count became a point of pride. Some lords even held informal contests who could produce the most eggs in a season. Who bred the most handsome rooster, one chronicler wrote of a nobleman named Raoul de Montfort, who dressed his favorite cockerel in a velvet pouch and brought it to feasts. This likely says more about Raoul than the chickens, but still a documented fact. And of course, with chicken management came chicken theft, and that was a serious crime. More than once, records show a serf being fined or even flogged for misappropriation of fowl. One infamous case involved a hen who laid eggs in 2 different cups, sparking a week-long dispute between neighbors. The local reeve had to mediate. His solution? They split the eggs and the hen was escorted, yes, escorted back to her original domicile. That's Norman justice for you. By the end of your day, your tally stick is full. You hand your half to the steward and pray the chickens don't mysteriously decrease overnight. Because if they do, guess who's blamed? Not the foxes. Not the wandering boys with slingshots. No, you. And while all of this may seem absurd now being responsible for the exact number of chickens you're not even allowed to eat, It was deadly serious then. Chickens represented food trade and status, and the Normans, conquerors that they were, knew that controlling chickens meant controlling yet another part of the newly tamed English countryside. So you trudge back through the muck thinking not of glory, not of battle, but of how many hens might have escaped under the fence while you were blinking. Your boots squish with every step, and somewhere behind you, a rooster crows like it's personally offended by your presence. But you're not just trudging through mud, you're navigating the world of Norman poultry accounting, which surprisingly involves as much ceremony as a coronation and more paperwork than a crusade. This morning's task, verifying your lord's inventory. But not in a cozy little notebook. No, you're using tally sticks again. You've sharpened your knife for the job. Not for protection, not for dinner. For carving chicken count notches. Because Norman England doesn't just run on feudalism, it runs on documentation. This is the part that really boggles your sleep-deprived peasant mind. They don't just count chickens, they categorize them. The Norman estate manager will want the count by breed, by color, by purpose, and yes, by name in some cases. You're expected to know the difference between a Sussex hen and a Dorking rooster, and woe betide you if you confuse a layer with a broiler. It's a poultry caste system. Each time you finish counting one group, you cross-reference the steward's parchment. And if something is off, prepare for suspicion. The Normans had this charming habit of assuming incompetence first, treason second, and foxes third. Sometimes in that order. You see, the Normans didn't just count chickens, they used the act of counting to assert control. That's the key here. Every beak, every feather, every egg was proof that the system worked, that they ruled, and that you, a humble dirt-smeared villager, knew your place in the hierarchy. It's chicken math as power play. To keep track of all this data in a world without Excel, the Normans employed scribes, many of whom were clergy, because they were the only ones who could write legibly and with fewer doodles of horses in the margins. These monks roped into estate work often found themselves recording poultry statistics alongside prayers. Some even started chicken-specific ledgers. One particular abbey in East Anglia documented the laying habits of its hens for over 50 years. Imagine devoting your life to the spiritual well-being of a monastery, and your job is to chart Gertrude the hen's productivity. There's also evidence that the Normans used oral declarations as part of their accounting. Once you had your tally, you would verbally swear the count in front of a local witness, usually a steward or reeve. And sometimes, for the fancier estates, this ritual involved an actual oath taken on a chicken. You'd hold the bird uncomfortably for everyone involved and say something along the lines of, "By this fowl, and my fealty I report true." Historians still argue whether this was common or ceremonial theater, but a few chronicles mention it seriously. And honestly, if you're already swearing on relic saints and ancestral swords, why not chickens? The Norman obsession with chicken tracking had one unintended consequence. It led to early experiments in standardized measurement. Since not all hens laid equally, estate managers began comparing egg yields. They started noting seasonal fluctuations, dietary impacts, even the effects of co-op orientation. This was proto-agricultural science in action. It's absurd, but kind of brilliant. Your average medieval chicken got more performance reviews than your cousin's startup job. There's even a charmingly bizarre footnote in one manuscript describing a miracle hen who laid 2 yolks in every egg. The monk who recorded it insisted this was a divine sign, though frankly it might have just been an overworked chicken. Still, it became a bit of lore. That chicken was blessed and retired from laying. She lived out her days in comfort, by which we mean she wasn't eaten. And not all chickens were equal. Oh no, some were estate mascots. A few were trained poorly to respond to calls or stay within painted boundaries. You'd laugh, but Norman noble children were sometimes given chickens as pets. There are even crude doodles found in the margins of illuminated manuscripts showing kids racing their chickens like chariots. These were not official races, mind you, but you'd better believe wagers were made. That's right, medieval chicken gambling. And here's where things get weird. Some Norman families believed certain chickens brought good luck. A rooster that crowed exactly at sunrise meant a profitable day. A hen laying before noon meant good harvests. These weren't superstitions to them, they were omens. If a chicken refused to eat, someone was probably going to die. Cue panic incense and a very confused chicken. These beliefs bled into estate management. Some chicken counters seriously kept logs of anomalous behavior among hens. One record found in a crumbling Norfolk estate ledger notes, hen number 16 refused corn. Steward believes ill fortune comes. That was followed by 3 days later, cow collapsed. Coincidence unclear, quirky, yes. But also a fascinating glimpse into the tangled web of farming faith and fear. At the end of your shift, you finally sit down with the steward. He reviews your tally stick. He compares it to last week's. He asks if any hens looked suspicious. Yes, suspicious. That's how seriously they take this. You answer as best you can, avoiding eye contact with one bird who's been side-eyeing you all day. The steward nods. You're dismissed. But he reminds you tomorrow is egg-weighing day, and next week the priest will bless the coop. Again. You walk away exhausted, smelling like feathers and sweat. The rooster crows again behind you, smug, and you start wondering, is this what conquest looks like? Not battles and banners, but spreadsheets made of wood and the crushing responsibility of miscounted poultry. Sleep creeps in slowly as the thought drifts through your head. They really did count their chickens before they hatched, and they probably taxed those eggs too. The morning fog hasn't even lifted when the Reeves' voice cuts through the village like a particularly sharp goose honk. Chicken tax today, he bellows as if anyone could forget. You sigh into your oatmeal, mostly oats, partially pebbles, and brace yourself. It's poultry rent day, which means once again your modest coop is about to get audited like it's hiding gold in the straw. You don't technically own your chickens, they belong to the estate. Or to God, or possibly to both depending on which local authority is interrogating you. You just raise them, feed them, and hand over a portion of the egg's meat or birds at regular intervals like a peasant subscription service. And if you're lucky, you're not docked a day's grain for the pleasure. See, the Normans brought with them a particularly crunchy form of feudal law. They didn't just demand service, they demanded tribute, and that tribute often took the form of poultry. Some tenants owed a fixed number of hens each quarter. Others had to deliver eggs on feast days. And some tragically were cursed with something called feather rent. Yes, you heard that right. Feather. Rent. Historians still debate whether that meant literal sacks of feathers or a metaphorical way of measuring chickens by weight. Either way, you're plucking your way through a fiscal nightmare. Now your Lord Steward has a very strict checklist. How many eggs did your hens lay this week? What was the weight average? Did any of them get into the rye again and lay funny eggs that happened once? The yolks came out green. People are still whispering. Every detail is logged. You suspect the steward cares more about your hens than about your well-being. You're not wrong. The system has layers like an onion, or an especially bureaucratic egg. At the top of the chicken hierarchy sits the noble class. Their hens are sleek, fat, and sometimes embroidered into tapestries. The lady of the house might have a personal coop just outside her chamber window so she can hear the comforting cluck of her prized birds. Below them are the villain serfs like you with obligations to produce poultry, but no rights to profit off of them. And then lowest of all the cotters. They don't even get a coop. They might raise a couple of scrawny hens next to their turnips, and if they can't meet quota, they pay in labor scrubbing coop floors or mending fencing. And don't think you can wriggle out of your poultry dues. There were entire court sessions dedicated to resolving fowl-related infractions. One transcript from a 12th century manorial court includes a case where a peasant was fined for hiding hens in his neighbor's shed to avoid his chicken tax. The punishment, 3 days in the stocks and the confiscation of all poultry-related assets. Harsh, yes, but effective. There's also the small matter of egg tithes, a delightful policy, whereby 1 in every 10 eggs went straight to the local church. You'd gather your basket each week, select the Holy 10, and hand them over to a very serious-looking monk who gave no indication that this transaction was weird. But it was weird. There were even disputes over which eggs should be tithed the freshest, the largest. The ones laid on Sunday, entire theological debates erupted over egg selection. Historians still argue whether some parishes accepted double yokers as bonus offerings or rejected them as unnatural. And then there's the most cursed tax of all, cockcrow rent. Yes, this was real. In a few specific locales, peasants had to deliver a live rooster to the Lord on Michaelmas morning as payment for the right to live on their land. The rooster had to crow on delivery. If it didn't, either you were accused of witchcraft or the Lord just took another chicken. Or two. You don't ask questions on cock crow day. You just pray your rooster's lungs are warmed up. Now imagine you're the poor peasant who raises the prize-winning chicken. Big bird, gorgeous feathers, lays like clockwork. Surely you'd want to keep her. But no, your steward shows up, sees that gleam in her eye, and she's gone. claimed as part of a royal or religious tithe. You can try to protest, but that usually ends with you pulling weeds for a week while your best hen lives in coop luxury down the hill. The economic impact was real. In many manners, chicken taxes represented a key source of revenue. Lords traded chickens for grain or used them to feed traveling knights. In some rare cases, poultry was even used as collateral. You'd offer 3 hens now, and if you missed a future payment, they'd come for the rooster. It was the original buy now, cluck later. And don't forget feast days. You thought you were done paying your dues, but suddenly there's a royal wedding, or some obscure saint's feast, and the manor demands festive poultry. That's code for your chickens are getting roasted whether you like it or not. You can either volunteer the meat or they'll choose for you. Spoiler, they never picked the scrawny one. All this counting, weighing, tithing, and taxing turns poultry into a full-time affair. Some lords even appointed official chicken reeves, basically poultry accountants. They inspected coops, issued fines, and were reportedly some of the least fun people at parties. One such reeve, a man named Osbert, became infamous for punishing a boy who tried to disguise a duck as a hen. To be fair, the duck quacked during roll call, so it was a bit obvious. As the sun sets, you tally your last egg hand over your dues, and watch your favorite hen get loaded into a cart destined for the abbey. You try not to get sentimental, but you do whisper goodbye. And maybe you curse the Norman tax system under your breath. You go to bed that night wondering if chickens had a say. Would they tax us right back? Would they keep records of who fed them on time, who named them, who stole their eggs? Maybe in another life, we're the poultry and they're the stewards. Just don't let the rooster hear you say that. It's early spring 1086, and a man with very neat handwriting is asking you how many chickens you have. You answer cautiously because this isn't your steward, your priest, or even your reeve. This is a royal scribe working on something called the Domesday Book, an enormous, unprecedented, soul-sucking survey of literally everything in England, including, yes, your chickens. You stand beside your modest coop doing mental math. You know how many hens you had last week, but one flew into the firewood pile and never came out, and another might have defected to the neighbor's yard. You can't lie, though. This man holds a quill and wears a cloak, which in Norman England is the universal symbol for "do not mess with me." The Domesday Book wasn't just a list, it was an imperial flex. William the Conqueror, paranoid and ambitious in equal measure, wanted to know the exact value of his new kingdom. So he ordered his officials to travel across the land, knocking on doors, asking nosy questions, and writing everything down. Land livestock tools. Peasants, if it breathed, clucked, or generated taxes, it was recorded. And that's how your humble chickens got immortalized in one of history's most famous documents. Somewhere deep in the cramped Latin of the Domesday entries, there's a line that translates roughly to 10 villains, 1 plow team, 40 sheep, 6 pigs, and 12 hens. That last number. That's yours. You've made it. Your official poultry. Historians still argue whether the Domesday Survey was intended purely for taxation, or if William genuinely wanted to understand the economics of his new realm. Either way, it became the most complete snapshot of 11th century rural life ever attempted, and poultry played a surprisingly large role. Some villages reported more chickens than people. In fact, one entry in Suffolk listed 115 hens for a population of 38. Either those villagers were poultry savants or someone was cooking the egg books, and the language of the survey reflects this avian importance. Hens were often counted separately from geese or ducks. Chickens had their own tax category in many regions, especially in areas where eggs were a major trade item. You couldn't just lump them together under miscellaneous fowl. These were working birds. The scribe continues his questions. How many eggs per week? How many hens died this winter? Did any get stolen? You mention the one-eyed fox that's been raiding the coop, and he scribbles something in Latin that probably translates to local wildlife nuisance probable liar. The documentation was intense. Scribes recorded not just numbers, but patterns. One entry reads, "This manor had 14 hens in the time of King Edward. Now there are but 10. Subtle shade. It's the medieval version of saying, we're not mad, we're just disappointed. And here's where things get strange. In some areas, the Domesday Book included notes on co-op design, like literal architectural details. Hens are kept in timber structures roofed with straw, west-facing to avoid harsh winds. Why? Because coop design affected egg yield, and egg yield affected tax value. That's right, medieval chicken feng shui. If your coop was angled badly and your hens underperformed, you could be less valuable to the crown. Even stranger, the survey often mentioned named chickens. Yes, named. We have no idea whether this was sentimentality or record-keeping formality, but at least one entry in Yorkshire includes a hen called Blanche. She was reportedly a large white layer unusually productive. Blanche is quite possibly the first named chicken in recorded English history. Give her a slow clap. But not everything made the cut. Roosters, for instance, were rarely counted unless they were breeding stock, which seems unfair since they're loud, flashy, and responsible for most of your sleep deprivation. Still, the scribes wanted utility, not personality. Roosters were background noise. And remember, the Domesday Book wasn't just descriptive. It was enforceable. If you were found to have more chickens than declared, there were consequences. The most polite was a fine. The less polite involved confiscation. One unfortunate tenant was said to have hidden 6 hens in a cellar and ended up forfeiting his entire coop. Not the birds, the actual structure. It was dismantled plank by plank and redistributed to the manor. Overkill, definitely. But Normans loved a theatrical punishment. Meanwhile, in the noble class, the Domesday Book caused chicken-related panic. Suddenly, every estate had to prove its productivity. Lords began overbreeding their flocks, investing in exotic chicken breeds from the continent, and boasting of their egg-to-land ratio as if it were some medieval KPI. One overly ambitious baron attempted to inflate his numbers by including chicks that hadn't hatched yet. The scribe declined. Chickens, it turns out, had to exist to count. That's not just a historical fact, that's logic. There was also regional variation. The further north you went, the fewer chickens appeared in the records. Cold weather, rocky soil, and Viking neighbors probably discouraged poultry proliferation. But in the south and east, chicken economies thrived. Markets popped up dedicated solely to eggs. Traveling merchants bought hens in bulk. And some towns even developed early forms of chicken co-ops, no pun intended, where several families shared a larger flock and split the profits. By the time the survey ended, it covered over 13,000 places and affected every corner of society. And yes, you were in it. Your land, your tools, your chickens. Your life scribbled into Latin bound in oak covers and stored for centuries in a royal archive that smelled like ink and damp vellum. You never see the Domesday Book, of course. You just hear rumors. That it lists everything, that it knows your secrets, that if you lie to a scribe, the wind changes and your hens stop laying. You scoff at that one until your best layer skips a day, and you start whispering apologies to the sky. As the sun dips low and your coop settles into its sleepy clucks, you realize something odd. For a moment in history, your chickens mattered. They were counted, valued, and preserved. Not for their beauty, not for their charm, but because they meant something to the mighty machine of Norman control. And maybe Blanche the hen knew she was famous. The rooster is crowing again, obnoxiously proud of himself like he invented the sun. You groan, throw a boot in his general direction, and rise to face another day of feathery status politics. Because by now you've realized something profound: not all chickens are created equal. And in Norman England, even the chickens had a social ladder. Let's start at the top, the elite breeds. These birds are the chicken equivalents of knights in shining armor, tall, confident, with absurd plumage and names that sound like minor nobility. One particularly prized breed, the Homburg, had black and white laced feathers and a ridiculous strut, and was favored by barons trying to show off their continental connections. And yes, the Normans absolutely imported fancy chickens from the mainland because even their birds had to speak a little French. These ornamental chickens didn't do much other than exist. They were never meant for the pot. They were for display, for boasting, and for weddings. There's a chronicled case of a wedding dowry that included 4 silver coins, 1 velvet tunic, and 2 prized hens of exceptional feather. Somewhere in England, a rooster once sealed a marriage alliance. Historians still argue whether chicken breeding in this period was a sign of genuine agricultural development, or just another expression of absurd feudal vanity. Probably both. What's certain is that noble households treated chickens not just as food, but as living trophies. Some coops were even decorated, yes, decorated. One estate near Kent included a miniature weather vane atop the chicken house. Because nothing says nobility like aerodynamic chickens. Now slide down the poultry pecking order, and you find the working class, your standard layers, brood hens, and meat birds. These were the backbone of the estate economy, They laid eggs, provided meat, and kept the manure flowing because, yes, chicken droppings were prized as fertilizer to the point where disputes occasionally broke out over who got to collect it. You may think it stops there, but no. Chickens could be further ranked by their personal behavior. That's right. Reputation mattered. Some hens earned nicknames based on productivity. A consistent layer might be called Goldie or Saint Egberta. A lazy bird, the slacker. One poor soul in Hereford had a hen nicknamed Demon Feet, who allegedly bullied the others and attacked children. She was eventually retired to stew after her third peasant assault. And that brings us to one of the weirder facts of Norman chicken culture reputation: could follow a bird. If you gifted or sold a chicken, you were expected to inform the buyer of its habits. A dishonest sale like offloading a non-laying hen as a strong producer could result in fines, or at the very least social scorn. There are even records of hen defamation, where someone accused another of lying about a bird's capabilities. One woman was taken to manor court for passing off a clucker as a layer. That's poultry fraud, folks. And let's not forget roosters. Roosters were loud, territorial, and occasionally violent, which made them ideal metaphors for Norman nobility. Some lords actually identified with their prize cocks, training them for aggression, and entering them into proto-cockfights. While formal cockfighting wouldn't become widespread in England until centuries later, there were definitely friendly matches where nobles pitted their roosters against one another for entertainment. Winner got bragging rights. Loser became soup. This obsession bled into art and symbolism too. The rooster became a common motif on weather vanes, estate crests, and even church towers. Some Norman churches bore carvings of cockerels, symbolizing vigilance and faith. But let's be honest, it also symbolized wake up and get to work, which made it the medieval equivalent of an alarm clock, and a motivational poster rolled into one. The social status of your chickens affected your social status. If your flock was productive and well kept, it reflected positively on your management skills. You were seen as trustworthy, diligent, and maybe even blessed. But if your chickens were scrawny missing feathers or frequently stolen, people assumed you were lazy, cursed, or just really bad at fences. And yes, this extended into the weird world of poultry-based superstition. Chickens were believed to be omens of personal fortune. A hen laying 2 eggs in a day, good luck. A rooster crowing at night, death in the village. A hen laying an egg without a shell, witchcraft. You could be summoned to explain yourself, or worse, the bird could be seized by the priest for examination, which was not code for anything other than old men arguing over eggshell integrity. One nobleman, Sir Etienne of Dorset, was so obsessed with his hens that he had a servant known simply as Gill, whose sole job was to pamper them. Feedings, feather grooming, bedtime inspections. If you're wondering how well Gill was paid, let's just say he had better quarters than most villagers. But it wasn't all glamour. For the average peasant, chickens were a fragile form of wealth. They were vulnerable to illness, theft, and foxes, and unlike pigs or cattle, they couldn't defend themselves. Some families slept with their favorite birds inside the house, tucked into baskets under the bed, a practice that gave rise to the phrase feathered guest. Romantic, no. Warm, definitely. And if you did manage to raise a particularly handsome bird, there was always a chance the Lord would simply take it. No compensation. Just a gracious requisition followed by a steward's nod, and your bird riding off to chicken Valhalla in a nobleman's cart. So you grow attached quietly. You don't name them, you don't brag, you just feed them, check the coop, and whisper promises of survival to your favorites. Because in Norman England, a good chicken wasn't just valuable, it was vulnerable. And the higher its status, the closer it was to someone else's dinner plate. You lie awake at night listening to the soft cooing of your birds and wonder what kind of legacy they'll leave behind. Maybe they'll be remembered. Maybe one will make it into the Domesday Book. Or maybe they'll just be tomorrow's stew. Either way, you know this in the grand theater of Norman life. You're not a knight or a lord or even a page. You are the chicken keeper. And your job is weirdly important. The wind's blowing colder this week, rattling the coop doors like an omen. You tug your cloak tighter and eye your flock with the grim responsibility of a medieval banker. Because in Norman England, these chickens, they aren't just poultry. They're currency. Forget gold coins. Most peasants never even saw a coin, let alone owned one. Trade was personal, immediate, and often clucked. Need firewood? Trade a hen. Need to rent a plow for the day? That'll be 2 dozen eggs. Want to marry off your daughter? Well, you'd better hope your dowry includes a respectable number of fowl. Chickens were portable, self-replicating, and universally understood as valuable. You didn't need Latin to understand a good layer, and that made them a kind of medieval credit system. A living wallet, if you will, albeit one that occasionally wandered off and tried to eat gravel. But like any form of wealth, chickens were subject to negotiation, manipulation, and debt. Yes, debt. Because sometimes a family didn't have enough chickens when the steward came calling, so they'd borrow. From neighbors, from kin, from that weird guy who talks to goats. I'll give you 2 hens now, he'd say, and you give me 3 after they've laid enough to repay the favor. Chickens had interest rates, and as you'd expect, this led to disputes. One particularly messy feud in Essex involved a man named Ethelric, who loaned his neighbor a prize hen for breeding, only to receive a scrawny replacement and 2 eggs as repayment. He took the matter to court, arguing the hen's laying character had not been equivalently returned. The judge agreed. The court awarded him a new hen, and the replacement bird was labeled inferior. That's not just a verdict, that's a roast. Historians still argue whether chicken-based credit systems contributed to the rise of more formal medieval banking later on. Some say these micro-trades taught peasants the basics of value storage and deferred exchange. Others argue it was more chaos than capitalism. But what's clear is that chickens weren't just alive, they were assets. Some were even named in wills. That's right, you could bequeath a chicken. To my son the coop and its 7 hens. To my daughter the rooster named Charles, who pecks everyone but lays no egg. Imagine being remembered that way in a legal document. And not just wills, dowries often included poultry clauses. A daughter might bring 10 hens to her marriage as a sign that she came from a productive home. Roosters were especially prized in these deals as symbols of fertility. There are records of wedding contracts that include notes like hen stock, to be transferred upon first snowfall, and yes, that means there was seasonal chicken escrow. But what happens when a bird dies mid-deal? That's where things get complicated. You might be expected to replace it, offer eggs in its stead, or if the bird was special enough, provide multiple replacements. One scribe notes a case where a hen named Maud died unexpectedly, and her worth was assessed at 4 eggs per fortnight until spring. You can almost hear the lawyer chickens clucking in agreement. And just like money, chickens had grades. Some were acceptable only for barter. Others were kept solely for collateral pledged against future promises. Let's say your roof collapses and you need repairs. You offer 3 hens as assurance that you'll pay the carpenter later. If you don't, the hens are his. And yes, there were reports of carpenters liberating their collateral early. One poor man awoke to find his best hen had been collected after he missed a single repayment. There were no notices, just feathers. Then there's the truly strange bit, poultry pawning. Some manor markets allowed short-term exchanges where you handed over a hen and received a basket of goods and returned grain wool ale. You were expected to buy your chicken back within a certain time, usually a week. If you didn't, the seller could either eat it or sell it forward. Early pawn shops. But chirpier. And like all economies, things went sideways during hard times. Disease, war, famine, any disruption could make chickens scarce. Prices soared, eggs were hoarded. There's a grim entry in one estate log that reads, 2 hens stolen, 3 eaten by wolves, 4 presumed cursed. That last one probably just didn't lay well, but fear did strange things to a peasant mind. Even priests got involved. Tithes could be delayed if you offered a hen as spiritual collateral. I have no coin, you'd say, but take this bird in penance. The priest would nod solemnly as if accepting your sins and then have roast dinner. There were even prayers for poultry productivity. Bless this coop, O Lord, that it may overfloweth with eggs. It rhymed better in Latin, but still. Unless you think this was just a rural thing, nobles used chickens in business too. One Earl of Northumbria reportedly paid his blacksmith in eggs for a year, calling it a noble barter. The blacksmith notably went on strike 2 months later. Apparently you can only eat so many omelets. One last feather in this cap chicken futures. Yes, Norman peasants sometimes bet on future yield. I will deliver 12 eggs come spring, you'd say, even if your hens weren't laying yet. It was risky. One cold snap and your birds froze. Or got ill. Or ran off with the neighbor's rooster. Now you're egg bankrupt and someone's knocking on your door demanding repayment in feathers or labor. As the sky dims and your flock settles down, you count your birds not with affection, but like a man checking his coin purse. You know which ones are worth more. Which ones are collateral. Which ones are promised in marriage or in debt or to the priest after Sunday Mass. They're not pets. They're not even food, not yet. They're your assets. and in the eyes of the Normans that makes them more valuable than you. It's a quiet morning, too quiet. The kind of quiet that means either all your chickens are asleep or up to something. You approach the coop cautiously, already bracing for bad news. But no, everyone's accounted for. They're clucking softly, pecking the ground, pretending they haven't been secretly planning a rebellion. You sigh, relieved, until you see the Reeve waiting at your fence. He's not smiling. This time it's not a count or a tithe, it's a dispute. Apparently someone in the next village is accusing you of stealing a chicken. Not just any chicken, their best chicken. A layer of noble yolks blessed by a bishop, probably and now mysteriously missing. And the witness, a child who claims they saw your hen walking suspiciously in the direction of the chapel. Fantastic. In most cases, this would be a simple misunderstanding. Chickens wander, coops aren't perfect. But in Norman England, chickens are legal property and sometimes, unfortunately, legal witnesses. Yes, you heard right. There were actual court cases where chickens were brought forward as evidence. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, exaggeration, or some form of medieval humor. But several manorial records mention hens present during proceedings, sometimes clutched dramatically by plaintiffs, as if the birds might squawk the truth. In one case, a rooster was presented in court to prove ownership because he allegedly responded to his owner's call by strutting over and pecking her boot. Open and shut case, apparently. So now you're standing in the middle of the manor court holding your own hen, your favorite Mildred, trying to prove she isn't the missing bird. The bailiff eyes her suspiciously. The plaintiff's steward starts listing reasons why Mildred is clearly the stolen hen, including identical comb pattern and a certain arrogant walk. You want to laugh, but you also don't want to get fined 3 days' wages or lose your best layer. To defend yourself, you turn to an unlikely ally. Chicken markings. That's right. Norman peasants sometimes mark their birds to prevent theft or confusion. Techniques included clipping a certain number of wing feathers, tying colored string to their legs, or rather dramatically painting a streak of ash or chalk across their back. One record even mentions a noble who used berry juice to dye his rooster red for visibility and intimidation. Thankfully, Mildred has her unique marking, still 2 clipped tail feathers left deliberately uneven. You show the court. The steward scowls. The judge, a man who's definitely over this entire situation, rules in your favor. The case is dismissed. Mildred gets a scratch of grain and a little peck on your hand like a smug victory nod. You walk home with your hen under your arm, feeling like you just defended yourself in a murder trial, which honestly wouldn't have been much more stressful. But these poultry legal proceedings weren't always so lighthearted. In a more bizarre and real case from 12th century France Norman territory at the time, a rooster was allegedly put on trial for laying an egg. Yes, laying. The court believed that such an act was unnatural, possibly demonic, and thus grounds for execution. Scholars today chalk it up to a biological fluke. Some roosters, due to hormonal irregularities, can lay an egg. But back then it was witchcraft adjacent. The rooster was sentenced to death, executed publicly, no defense attorney, no appeal. Justice Norman style. And while England didn't quite take things that far with poultry, the principle remained. Chickens were part of the legal landscape. Stealing one was like robbing a purse. Damaging a coop could be considered destruction of property. And disputes over ownership fair game for court days, complete with witnesses' character testimony. And in at least one known case, a priest called in to determine whether a stolen egg could be spiritually traced to its original hen. It's ridiculous. And yet, not really. Because when chickens are food money taxes and family dowry protecting them, it's protecting your entire life. And the court system, flawed as it was, took these things seriously. You could bring forward witnesses, not just people, but circumstantial chicken evidence. A trail of feathers, a coop with disturbed straw, an alibi involving the feeding schedule. One court case even included time of day arguments. This hen could not have crossed the field by noon, as the plaintiff claims, because she is known to nap between matins and sext. So yeah, welcome to your new title chicken lawyer. The legal attention to poultry even shaped Norman rural customs. Coops were moved to visible areas to discourage theft. Neighbors sometimes shared chicken custody, rotating feeding duties to maintain neutrality. And in villages with frequent disputes, chickens were banded or branded so no one could argue over whose cluck belonged to whom. By the time the sun sets, Mildred is back in her coop, pecking serenely like she didn't just star in a feathery courtroom drama. You lean on the fence watching your birds settle. You think about all the absurd things you've been through. Egg taxes, poultry collateral reputation, damage via lazy layers, and now legal chicken trials. And yet somehow it all makes sense. These birds, they're woven into the fabric of Norman life. They're more than livestock. They're the metric of trust, the medium of exchange, the spark of feuds, and occasionally the defendant in court. The coop rustles softly. You hear a gentle cluck, then silence. And so with the moon rising and your hens finally asleep, we slow things down now for a little wind down. The breeze whispers through the thatch, gently nudging the coop doors as if to say goodnight. The straw rustles a soft bedding for birds who've seen battles, barters, and bench trials. You rest your arms on the fence, eyes growing heavy as the stars settle into their proper places overhead. The chickens are still now curled into feathery mounds of quiet warmth, their tiny dreams drifting beyond the hedge. You breathe deeper, slower, letting the weight of the day ease from your shoulders. No more counting, no more taxes, no more squabbles over roosters with attitude problems. Just the soft cadence of night, the coos of contentment, and the comfort of knowing that for once every hen is exactly where she belongs. The air cools, the world quiets, and in this odd little corner of history among these modest creatures and their ridiculous importance, you found something simple, something safe. You've done your part. The chickens are home, and so are you. End of script. Sweet dreams.